Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th Annual Washington Ohide Foundation Service Awards. Please rise for the singing of the national anthems of Greece and the United States, sung by Sierra Militas.
Σε γνωρίσα από την κόψη του σπαθιού την τρομερή. Σε γνωρίσα από την όψη που με διαμετράει δειλή. Απ' τα κόκαλα βαλμένη των Ελλήνων τραϊερά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χαίρε ελευθεριά. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
Please welcome Washington Oxi Day Foundation Executive Director, Mike Manitos.
Thank you all for joining us today at our 12th Annual Washington Oxi Day Foundation Service Awards. What a fittingly beautiful day it is today. Before we pay tribute to these three remarkable veterans, we would like to take a moment to recognize a few people in the crowd who will not be participating in our program. First, we have last year's recipient of the Oxi Service Award, Vietnam veteran Pete Vergados. Pete? And despite a last-minute meeting called at the Pentagon this morning, we have quite a number of countries represented by their defense attachés. We have with us today Australia, Belgium, Brazil, China, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, and Romania, as well as over 15 personnel for the Greek military. And we'd also like to thank the Howard Armed Forces ROTC for joining us today. We'd also like to thank our sponsors who are in attendance, Calamos Investments and Hasiotis Family Foundation in Manitos and Manitos. And our Washington Oxi Day Foundation board member, someone who's been from us from day one of this 12-year journey, Leon Andrews. Thank you all for being here. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Dear distinguished guests, we come together filled with great joy and deep emotion to commemorate the Oxi Day and to honor all those men and women who served with self-denial and heroism under the flags of Greece and US throughout the years. Before I go on, let me convey the heartfelt greetings of the political and military leadership of the Hellenic Ministry of National Defense, whom I represent in today's ceremony. Surrounded by historical legacy in a memorial that signifies that ultimate sacrifice of the American people in the struggle against the darkest form of authoritarianism and oppression, we stand here today to celebrate the Greek contribution to the World War II. Nevertheless, it is important to keep in mind that the Oxi Day doesn't represent one more national celebration of the events related to World War II. On the contrary, it expresses the first out-loud call for resistance against the raging fire of fascism that had already burned away almost all Europe at the time. The Greek Prime Minister's reply to the Italian ultimatum, laconic and profound in times that Europe has been under the Nazis' advance, didn't just lead to war with Axis. Ioannis Metaxas, with one single word, Oxi, which means no, emphatically stood against the forces of fascism, tyranny, and hatred, and signaled a resounding yes to freedom and justice. October 28, 1940, united Hellenism and set the example for the free world that was in the merge of losing hope in front of the Nazi mechanized supremacy of the time. In this sense, the effective Greek counter-offensive of late 1940 has been characterized as the first Axis setback of the entire war. It portrayed a David versus Goliath victory, which degraded the myth of Oxi's invincibility and gave the Allies the boost in confidence they needed to overturn the outcome of the war and defeat the Axis powers. To the freedom cause, Greece has not felt left alone. It was United States and Greek diaspora that played pivotal role in keeping the Greek struggle for freedom alive. Greek Americans not only helped to alleviate the grievances of Nazi occupation for the Greek population, but also served under stars and stripes in support of Hellenism and the Allied cause. This honorary legacy and the transatlantic bonds between the two countries didn't wither out with the end of the war. On the contrary, as the today's award nominations indicate, Greece shares the same ideals and fights for the same values as with the United States throughout the post-World War II history. Greek Americans not only served honorably to Vietnam, Korea, and elsewhere, but also like Dr. Hatzopoulos, Colonel Jack Jacobs, and George Popas, that we honor today with the Oxi Service Award, contributed to the consolidation of the United States scientific and technological supremacy, which shaped this modern liberal world. Dear guests, today we pay respect to our fallen heroes. We attribute honor to the distinguished Greeks and Americans, which inspired with their courage the two peoples, and most importantly, we unite our voice with all the free world against authoritarianism, revisionism, and nationalism that threatens once more Europe and the rest of the world. Through our unequivocal support to the brave Ukrainian people, not only we remain on the right side of the history, but we also declare that stand ready to pay the price for freedom without reservations, indecisiveness, or hesitation, as a million of Greeks, Americans, and other allies did in the battlefields of the World War II. Thank you so much.
Well, we have as our next speaker someone who has done many firsts in this country. And all the years we've had this, we've been blessed to have the Defense Attaché of Greece represent the country. But we have with us today, for the first time, the Ambassador of Greece to the United States, who's also the first female Ambassador of Greece to the United States, Alexandra Papadopoulou. Please.
Thank you. It is an honor for me to be here today. Today we remember a very glorious chapter in Greek history when the Greek government and the Greek people said no to fascism and Nazism. But we don't only remember, we honor those who gave their lives, who gave their whole soul and brain to the cause of freedom, who sacrificed so many things so that all of us live in freedom and peace today. And these people are personified in the names behind me, whom the Oxi Foundation honors today. But above everything else, we give a commitment for the future. Because there is no point to remember the past and celebrate the heroes if we don't commit ourselves to continuing their work. Today we say no to so many things, no to invasions, no to prejudice, no to fascism, no to discrimination, no to revisionism, and yes to the values we all share, both Greeks and Americans, the values that are so close to our hearts and the values we should give to our children and grandchildren: freedom, rule of law, respect for each other. Big honor and thank you to the people who gave their lives and gave their time and gave their freedom for us to live today as we live, and thank you to the people who take the awards on their behalf.
Please welcome Washington Oxi Day Foundation President and Founder, Andrew Matzos.
Thank you all for being here with us today. It's a very important day. And I must say that for most Americans, I don't think people in the service are really fully appreciated. And I do think that there are some ways that the proper appreciation can be understood. And one that I'd like to point out for those of you who may not be aware of it is on the other side of this fountain. There are 4,048 gold stars. In front of those stars are the words, "This is the price of freedom." Each of those stars represents 100 Americans who lost their life in World War II. It's just hard to imagine that many people giving their lives like that. But it's also hard to imagine what happened to their families. And this is the case, of course, with every war where there are losses. And a man whose son had been killed in battle told me a story that was incredible. He was going home to let his family know, and he stopped at the threshold of the house and looked inside to see how happy was his wife and were his children. But he realized that as soon as he entered that house with his information, that their lives would never be the same again. And so you can imagine, with 400,000 people dying there and so many others in all the other American wars, how many families, how many people were devastated and had their lives just sadly damaged. But thank God for our military. The other thing that I think, and I don't think enough Americans have been taught this, but were it not for our military, we would not have the freedoms that we have. These things are not automatic, and I find too many young people just think this is the state of the way things are. But those of us who have seen much of this understand that's not the case, and our military is the reason. We owe a great debt of gratitude to them. Some of America's leading citizen soldiers received the award that's going to be received here today, and I might mention them. They are former U.S. Senate Majority Leader and presidential candidate Bob Dole, astronaut and United States Senator John Glenn, Senators Danny Inouye and Ted Stevens, members of the House, Ralph Hall, Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Ben Gilman, and the longest-serving member is John Dingell. But we're very proud today to have those who are here who will be joining this distinguished list. Thank you.
Please welcome to present our first award, the Vasilios S. Hasioto Service Award, co-trustees of Vasilios S. and Aphrodite B. Hasiotos Family Foundation, George Anazelos.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As a child, I knew Dr. George Hatsopoulos as George. Most of the thermoelectron kids did. George's company was like a family. We shared Easter and Christmas together and knew each other's parents and grandparents well. Despite what my children may think, I was not alive during World War II. I was told the story of George's efforts during the war by my dad, but not in enough detail to do it justice here. A biography was written by a friend of my dad's and George named Tom Widmer. He interviewed George and many of his colleagues, family, and friends to produce the work. I will read you an excerpt from it that describes the story in much better detail than I could. The book is titled George N. Hatsopoulos, An American by Design. An early high-risk venture. Despite years of terror, murder, and starvation under German occupation, the people of Greece continued to believe in an eventual Allied victory that would liberate them from bondage. It is estimated that 1 in every 8 Greek citizens, 1 million victims, died between 1941 and 1945. Another 1 million people were homeless at the war's end. More than 1,300 villages and towns had been razed to the ground, both by the Germans and by communist insurgents seeking to take over Greece in the wake of Germany's withdrawal in the autumn of 1944. Upon occupying Greece in 1941, the Nazi authorities moved quickly to block all flow of information into the country. To accomplish this, they imposed a ban on radio receivers, except those that were locked to the frequency of local German propaganda stations. Anyone tampering with these sealed radios was subject to arrest and possible execution for subversive action against the occupation. Like most Greek households in Athens and other cities, the Hatzopoulos family had been forced to donate a portion of their home to provide quarters for German officers. 2 Army lieutenants took over the living and dining rooms, thus squeezing George's family into the kitchen and 2 bedrooms. There was also a small basement space where George tinkered with various experiments to satisfy his growing curiosity about all things scientific. Just 14 years old when the occupation began, George decided to turn his technical skills toward the construction of a contraband radio receiver that could keep him informed about world events. In particular, he wanted to listen to the powerful shortwave radio transmissions from the British Broadcasting Corporation in order to monitor the war's progress. George's clandestine basement project somehow managed to escape the notice of the Germans living upstairs, though his parents would have been horrified at the risk of reprisal if it had been discovered. A German officer did visit George's primitive workshop once, but he went away unconcerned about this seemingly harmless teenage hobby. Word of his radio building venture eventually reached members of the Greek resistance forces, and they approached him with a request to build a transmitter. George explained that only a low-power device would be feasible given the limitations of the available materials. Since his new customers were only looking for a system to work over a range of 10 to 20 miles in their mountain hideaways, they immediately agreed to buy one of his yet-to-be-proven transmitters. Successful operation of this unit led to the purchase by guerrilla fighters of 2 more of these transmitters prior to the German withdrawal in the autumn of 1944. George's wartime venture into radios provided early evidence of strong entrepreneurial instincts that would become the hallmark of his future business achievements. In studying the workings of vacuum tubes, George had observed how electrons were transported from a heated cathode to a cool anode, a phenomenon that Edison had described during his experiments with filaments for the electric light. In particular, George noted in his journal that small electrical currents continued to flow even when the voltage across the electrodes had been removed. He speculated that such thermionic emissions could provide the basis for an innovative process to generate electricity. Instead of boiling water to drive a steam turbine, one might simply boil electrons from a hot surface, thereby converting heat directly into electricity without the need for any moving parts. A decade later, George chose thermionics as the basis for his doctoral thesis at MIT. These studies would lead directly to his founding of the Thermoelectron Corporation in 1956. Thermoelectron, now Thermo Fisher, currently employs over 130,000 people and has a market value of over $400 billion. That's quite a legacy to be proud of. Our family feels strongly that George's actions during World War II and his subsequent contributions to society in America are well deserving of the Vasilios and Aphrodite Hasiotis Service Award. Please accept this from us with thanks for his service to Greece and to America.
It's a great honor for me today to accept the Hasiotis Award given by the Oxi Foundation on behalf of my late husband, George Hatsopoulos. Now I would like to turn the mic over to our son, Nico, who will tell you about another military adventure of George.
I want to tell you a little story about how my father became an American citizen. As a young child, he always wanted to come to America and become an American. That's always been his dream. So in 1948, he came to the States to study at MIT and got his bachelor's and master's there. And as he was preparing to start his PhD program in 1951, some overzealous recruiters from the U.S. Army issued a draft notice to him saying you need to report to Fort Dix for basic training. Now, in principle, of course, he didn't need to serve, right? He was not a U.S. citizen, but he played dumb. And he thought maybe this might be an opportunity down the road to become a U.S. citizen. So he joined the basic training group at Fort Dix, learned some basic skills in military action, and everything was going fine. At one point, he did admit to the Army. He said, I'm actually not a U.S. citizen. They said, doesn't bother us. You're a great soldier. You will be a good soldier. You're training very well. Doesn't bother us. But it did bother the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And they came to the Army and said, you need to hand over George Hatsopoulos. The Army said, no way. So that began a dispute between, ultimately, I guess, the Departments of State and Departments of Defense. And it was going to go to court. Eventually, they agreed not to go to court, but he still had a visa, a student visa that was expiring, and so he had to renew his visa. So he left the country, spent some time on a World War II tanker going down South America. It's a long story, but he returned to the United States, and fortuitously, in 1953, when President Eisenhower became president, he had promised during the campaign that people, foreign nationals that had served with the U.S. Army, could become automatically citizens. And so that's how he became an American citizen. He didn't need to become a resident first. He went straight to citizenship because of this accident in which he served briefly in the U.S. Army. Thank you.
Please welcome to present our second award, the Calamos Service Award, decorated Vietnam veteran and chairman of the National Hellenic Museum, John Calamos.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with all of you today to present the Calamos Service Award. As we all know, those who served in Vietnam were not welcomed home with warmth or parades. Instead of being thanked for their service to our country, they were often criticized and even disparaged, often by their own community, friends, and family. Nothing can take back the pain of these difficult homecomings, but each day gives us the opportunity to revisit history and do better. In the case of Vietnam veterans, it means acknowledging the great sacrifices and bravery of those who served. As chairman of the National Hellenic Museum, I would like to thank the Oxi Day Foundation for partnering with us to capture and preserve the oral histories of heroes like today's honoree, Colonel Jack Jacobs. Together, the National Hellenic Museum and Oxi Day Foundation will ensure that our veterans are not forgotten. Their stories will be available to educate and inspire future generations. The Calamos Service Award celebrates the Hellenic values of civic responsibility and service, so aptly demonstrated by the U.S. Army veteran Colonel Jack Jacobs. Jack Jacobs served as a platoon leader in the 82 Airborne Division and executive officer in the 7th Infantry Division and commanded the 4th Battalion, 10th Infantry in Panama. He served in Vietnam twice, both times as an advisor to Vietnamese infantry battalions, earning 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest combat decoration. Following our military careers, Colonel Jacobs and I both forged our own path in the investment industry. After retiring from the military in 1987, he founded the Auto Finance Group, one of the first firms to pioneering securitization of debt instruments, and became a managing director of Bankers Trust, where he ran foreign exchange options worldwide and was a partner in institutional hedge business, among other pursuits. I wouldn't be surprised if unknowingly we crossed paths over those years. for his service, sacrifice, shared passion in investment industry, and more importantly, lifelong embodiment of the best of our military community, I am honored to present Colonel Jack Jacobs with the Oxi Service Award.
Thank you very much, John. Madam Ambassador, distinguished guests, fellow recipients. My father's parents came to this country a little over a century ago from Ioannina in the mountains of northern Greece. And a few decades later, my father was at the University of Minnesota studying electrical engineering in the middle of the Second World War. And he was summarily dragged out of school and sent into the Army where he fought in the South Pacific, in New Guinea and the Philippines. He hated getting dragged out of school, hated the Army, hated getting shot at. Nobody likes getting shot at. And he got out of the Army as soon as he possibly could when the war was over. And yet, when he got to be my age, all he would talk about was how proud he was at having saved the world. And his generation had saved the world. Meanwhile, across the ocean, brave Greek people, my father's relatives and their countrymen, turned back fascism by the use of one word, Oxi. And today we can see the same thing happening on another continent as the valiant Ukrainians are saying no to aggression. I'm reminded of an observation of John Stuart Mills, and I'll adumbrate it. He said, war is a terrible thing, but it's not the worst of things. A man for whom nothing is more important than his own safety is a miserable creature who is made free and kept free by better men than he. Liberty is very difficult to achieve, and it's harder sometimes to hold on to it. It takes service and sacrifice and blood, and it all starts with one word, Oxi. Thank you very much for this honor. I will cherish it.
Please welcome for our final award, Washington Oxi Day Foundation Executive Director, Mike Manitas.
So I should mention I listed the different countries that are represented by their defense attachés today, and I didn't recognize one who's possibly the most significant. All of us, every morning we turn on the news, we see the latest in the war that's got everyone in the world consumed, and that's the war in Ukraine. We have representing the defense attaché of Ukraine here. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's an honor. So the recipient of our final award, the 2022 Oxi Service Award, is George Popas. As a teenager, he also fought during World War II in Greece and the resistance against the Nazis. He then came to the United States and served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. While he's unable to travel to join us today, he sent his son to represent him. Well, the son of George Popas is none other than the highest Greek American ranking in the U.S. military and one of only 17 four-star generals in the U.S. Army. We've been honored to have him as our keynote speaker twice, and we are thrilled to have him back here a third time, but this time to present the service award to his father. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commanding General of the United States Army Forces, General Andrew Popas.
Andy, thank you. Madam Ambassador, you honor us with your presence here today. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you, as we start this, it's hard enough to sing one national anthem, let alone two. So the young lady that was singing, if she's here, that was wonderfully done. But I'll tell you, Andy, the one thing I do have to say is, everybody else got pictures in their youth. There was a time that I used to have hair like my son Nico. I would have picked a much different picture for myself.
but thank you. And for Andy and Mike and the fellow honorees, and standing and sharing a stage with Colonel Jacobs, who I've known from before, he is a true warrior. He's an inspiration to us all, and I hope you see he's got a great sense of humor. And thank you for having him here today. And Pete, being here today and getting to see you, you still win the award for the best mustache on a pilot from Vietnam forward, and you keep rocking it. It's great to see you. And to all at the Ohi Day Foundation and teammate supporters, thank you very much. It's great to be here. For not only allowing me to return for this year's event and another year of beautiful weather, which just shows how much God loves the Greeks, but more importantly, to accept this honor on behalf of my father. As Mike identified, my dad is 91, and he intended to be here, and he regrets not being able to make it. He could not travel from Wisconsin. But it's my privilege to stand here for him and accept this honor. And I'll tell you, you're never too old to want to make your parents proud. And that's what that means to me. And I don't take this opportunity to rep my father, George, and the whole family name lightly. It is an honor. Because growing up in a Greek-American household, our family name was everything. It was our foundation. It's what we honored and represents our integrity. That's what it means to my family and the name. And some of you might have similar experiences growing up. Because when one of us kids got in trouble in the years past, and usually it was me, though I was framed, the worst punishments were when my dad would actually take our name away. And when we went out, after that happened, we could introduce ourselves only by our first name, because whatever transaction, it brought dishonor on the family. And until we earned back that distinction, we couldn't use our last name. And you chuckle now, but as a youngin', that had a pretty profound impact. So I'm especially proud to be here today, in good standing, I might add, to accept the award that bears the name George Pappas. He's right behind me there. I would have picked a younger picture for him, too. I think it's in there. And it represents his values. Now, one of my dad's most closely held values is his humility. And it's one of the things that I most respect about my father. And if he were here standing right now today, the first thing he'd tell you is that he has no business being on this stage with people in the same breath as a Medal of Honor recipient or a world-renowned mechanical engineer. Colonel Jacobs and Daphne and Nico, thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories, letting my father share the stage with you. Ever humble, my father would tell you that he's no hero. He merely enjoyed the simple life, working hard in service to others, and by making the most of the opportunities that he was provided, that he was given. And he owes it all really, initially, to a local butcher in Patras, Greece. You see, the story began, as we just identified, with Ohi Day in 1940. Madam Ambassador, nobody put it more eloquently or passionately as you did last evening. And it went on for 4 years. Those were 4 hard-fought and bloody years. During that time frame, my dad was 10, 11, 12. Now, he wasn't a fighter per se, but he resisted. And he filled that crucial role in support of the fight. He pointed anti-Nazi slogans. He passed out flyers to bolster the community resistance. He ran supplies, stole from the Germans, pushed intel up into the resistance fighters in the mountains itself. And it brings me back to the story of the butcher, because he was the only one remotely equipped as the medic on the day that my father was shot. When he had, in the mountains while running supplies, the Germans caught him, and as he ran away, he was shot. But I want you to imagine that in the 1940s, in a remote location up in the hills north of Patras. You're not even a teenager. There's a bullet lodged in your body, you're bleeding, and your friends take you to the town butcher because you couldn't go to the doctor at the time when you're wounded. He was being watched. Now, while the butcher at the time lacked any type of anesthetic, he had sharp knives, and he actually could cut cleanly. But my father knew that his Greek brothers and sisters, committed to one another through Philotimo and the full community, would pull through and save his life. And they did. I wouldn't be here. And they also pulled through for Greece and the entire free world by their commitment, resisting Nazi oppression until the German withdrawal in 1944. It was a year later that my father left, knowing that he played a small, humble role in serving his people and his country. Not for personal glory, but for a cause always greater than himself, and that's freedom. He earned his name. Now, Dad was a naturalized American citizen through his father. And that allowed him passage to the United States, and he sailed home. 15 years alone on a ship that landed in New York City. And he again found himself depending on the kindness and support of his fellow Greeks in the community. Because through miscommunication, when he got off that ship alone, the family was not there to meet him. And as he waited, he feared that without being given over to family, that they're going to send him right back to Greece. So he ran away. He didn't speak English, and he went to a local Greek community in New York, and he went to a diner. And at 15, they brought him in. He worked there. They gave him shelter. And then later, through the church connections, family finally came up through Philadelphia, picked him up, and took him back down to live with family. And it was there in Philadelphia that he finished high school. Now, it wasn't long before, now being a naturalized American, that he was called to serve again. This time, like others, drafted during the Korean War. But once again, Dad was asked to put his mind and his relationships to work. Not on the battlefields of Korea, but conducting counterintelligence operations against the Soviets in post-World War II Germany, on both sides of the border, moving freely, east and west. And when that tour was complete, Dad returned back to the United States. Now, he returned back because he was smitten with a Greek-American woman that he had found and met over in Germany. And he followed her back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she had recently graduated from Marquette University prior to her own European travels. And it's also where he used his GI Bill earned from his military service to earn his own degree in Milwaukee. And it's where he raised my sister, my brother, and myself, as we strive to earn and continue to re-earn our own name. Now, Dad worked hard. He built businesses. He served on the city council, raising up to the point of president. He served on the police, the fire commission, and committed himself to the community, because he has lived and continues to live what he calls the American dream. And I think that's what this reward recognizes. It's not my father, George Pappas, as an individual man, but rather his story of opportunity, it's of work, and it's of service. And it's a story shared by so many Americans across so many generations. But I'll tell you, when I was a kid, my dad used to tell us the stories about Greece. He'd rave about its beauty. He'd rave about its culture, its food, and how proud we were to be Greeks. I said, that sounds fantastic. We need to move back. But he said, hey, but there's a reason that our family is here. Because for us right now, America's been our land of opportunity. Dad came here in the 40s after a war-ravaged Greece to rise as high as he was willing to work, limited only by his own inspiration. And he has remained relentlessly committed to the communities and the people who allowed our family to thrive. Now, my father's legacy, his name, includes the opportunities he and Mom built for all three of our children. My sister Athena did her undergrad at Brown Medical School, Madison, Wisconsin. And she's a cardiologist that just gave up being the president of the American College of Cardiologists. My brother went to film school. He's a cinematographer out in Los Angeles for TV and film. He followed his passion. For myself, I'm a soldier also. I rose through the same army in which my dad was drafted into, serving multiple tours overseas. You're never too old to want to make your parents proud. Never. I want to thank you for this experience, Mike. Thank you very much. I'll deliver this award to my father over the Veterans Day weekend. I'm going to share the stories that I've heard from everyone this afternoon. But more importantly, I'm going to continue to serve and maintain the integrity of the name. Thank you very much. Where do you want it?
So to conclude our program, if I could ask each of our honorees to stand behind me. The Lieutenant Jacobs, General Pappas, and Hatsopoulos, please stand there. One of the most iconic images from World War II in the Greek Ochi was the Evzon on the cover of Life magazine. So the Washington Ohi Day Foundation has, if you could, we'll take a picture with each of you holding the framed pictures, has framed an original copy of the Life magazine with the Evzon on the front. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for being with us. Thank you for those that serve. Thank you for your service. We look forward to seeing some of you tonight. Have a wonderful afternoon.